Well, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are, whenever you are watching this. My name is Alex Sanchez. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. And I'm extremely excited today to have our friends from FLEXE here and talking about supply chain resilience, particularly when it comes to retail. Before we get things started, I would like to make a couple of housekeeping announcements for everybody. For a much better webinar experience, we're gonna keep everybody muted. However, as you can see, this is gonna be a very fluid conversation between our moderator and the panelist. To the point that there's not going to be any slides to present. It's really going to be truly a conversation. But in the spirit of keeping it, two-way conversation, we also want to hear from you. So please feel free to ask any questions or comments into the questions section and the GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll make sure that David and the team have access to it and address them properly within the time frame that we have. With that being said, once again, welcome everybody on behalf of CSMP and FLEXE. I'm really excited to have this topic for you. And with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you to CSCMP for hosting and to those who've joined today's sessions. We're going to talk about Q4 readiness and supply chain resilience. But first, I'd like to start with introductions. I'm Dave Glick. I'm the CTO at FLEXE. FLEXE is a on-demand warehousing company where we match shippers who need a warehouse space with empty warehouse space in our network of 1,400 3PLs. For that, I spent 20 years at Amazon, where I was responsible for the warehouse management system and all the transportation technology, including, as it turns out, Amazon FLEXE. So that's kind of ironic. Jenny, would you like to share about yourself and Convey?
Yeah, I'm Jenny Bebout. I am co-founder of Convey. We are a delivery experience management platform, which means we ingest data from some of the largest e-commerce retailers in the world to power better order experiences and delivery outcomes.
Matt, second marathon.
Sure, thanks, Dave. I'm Matt. Pleasure to be invited to join the most exciting modern logistics technology companies out there. Just a little bit about me. I've spent most of my career building e-commerce operations within startup companies. Where I was an early employee at both Rent the Runway and Birchbox, where I helped those businesses scale from their first few weeks of operations. And then moved to California, joined a logistics startup out there called Ship. And then in 2017, I started Second Marathon, the business I run today with my partner, whereby we partner with emerging and high growth e-commerce brands and really help them solve modern challenges by navigating traditional logistics functions.
Great. And Rodney, you want to tell us about Anvyl and yourself?
I hope everyone's doing well out there. I'm Rodney Manzo, founder and CEO of Anvyl. Anvyl is a supply chain relationship management technology that helps digitize your first mile to save you a tremendous amount of time and money, from supplier discovery to goods arriving in your distribution center or retailer. We work with some of the biggest to fastest moving brands in the world. So excited to be here today and share more.
Great. Well, our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about COVID-19, which is on everybody's mind, the impact it's had on the supply chain and where we are today, what to expect and how to prepare for Q4. I think, we had Q4 once already, and we're going to have like double Q4 this year. And then how to build resilience and readiness into your strategies in time for Q4, even though it's just around the corner. And I'd like to remind attendees, please submit your questions throughout the session via writing in the webinar chat box, and we'll queue them up for the panelists. So let's start COVID-19. I'm going to ask everybody, what are your perspectives on COVID-19 and as a supply chain disruption? What have you seen so far, and what are your biggest takeaways? Rodney, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'm sure top of mind for everyone right now. So I think there's a few themes that we saw. Number one is cost and lead time impacts that led to number two, increased flexibility in the supply chain. And I pulled some of the data from what we've seen. So if you look at December in China, the lead times delay increased from around 9 days to over 20 days. Quickly actually came back down, and now they're below 5-day delay. So they actually improved, which is something interesting to think about, from 9 to 5 days. I'm not truly sure what happened. In the US, it's a similar model. It just happened months later, and we're still not out of it. So you continue to see increased lead times in your first mile. The other takeaway was, around the cost side, shipments increased from below $10 a kg, leaving China or Asia in general, to above 20. Quickly it rebounded. So people are probably spending less right now on logistics. But ultimately that led to increased flexibility in the supply chain, and people are adding different layers that they've never had before. So that's what we were seeing here at Anvyl.
It's fascinating to see you started at 9 days and ended up at 5 days, and to see when you have disruptions like this, you end up with innovation. So that's a great silver lining. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the world has changed dramatically for literally every brand I know. Every brand that I'm a customer of, or that we support at Second Marathon. But what's interesting is the dichotomy between those that have really been thriving and those that have been struggling is really quite fascinating. I've spoken to a handful of brands that are literally experiencing their best months ever, and some of these businesses are years old, and typically Q2 is a little softer, heading into the summer, a little softer for a lot of these brands. So, it's remarkable. And then sort of on the other side of the ledger, you have brands that are struggling mightily. Either their product is highly discretionary, they're having production issues, that Rodney sort of alluded to. Maybe they're kind of over-indexed to the offline or specialty retail world, where a lot of those doors are closed. But it really is fascinating to see kind of the spread between brands that are succeeding and those that are not so much. But I think really all brands are really trying to understand what the world looks like when we come out of this. And that's sort of the challenge. And I think very few are willing to throw a dart at the board and sort of pinpoint when that will happen. Feels very much like a lost cause, but accepting that things will change, consumer purchasing habits, cadence at which they order, and what that looks like when we come out of this period is sort of the million-dollar question.
And do you worry about the rich getting richer? You said, some brands are getting stronger. There's one down the street in Seattle that fits that, but do you worry about that driving more division?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure if I worry about that. I think that's sort of a different philosophical question that I'm sure, Dave, you have strong opinions on, given your alma mater. But I think generally, given the amount of change and how quickly the change has happened over the last few months, e-commerce as an industry as a whole kind of feels like a startup. So there will be an incredible amount of experience. Some of the largest companies over the next decade are being born right now that, the hundreds of us on this call right now do not know who they are. So yes, on the one hand, Amazon is getting larger and shipping more boxes today than they did a number of months ago, but there's a lot of opportunity for everyone in that space.
Jenny, what are your thoughts?
I appreciate the creativity right now in these companies. So the behemoths that have this enormous amount of red tape are able to execute on ideas in days and weeks. I mean, they're really being forced to. So I think as an entrepreneur too, I appreciate being able to see them be nimble and act quickly. I think they realize more of these things are actually possible without the red tape, So I'm curious of how that will, continue, like how the processes will continue after, COVID.
It is fascinating how survival leads to innovation, or the need for survival leads to getting rid of a bunch of the BS and bureaucracy. So the move to e-commerce has been substantial. I think we saw 6% to 16% market share in e-commerce over the last 10 years, and then 16% to 27% in the last 10 weeks. And so Jenny, do you think that's here to stay? What do people need to do to catch up and keep up?
Yeah, I mean, I saw 40% more shoppers are using e-commerce for the first time ever. And growth is projected to leapfrog like 2 years. So it doesn't appear that e-commerce volumes will slow down at this point. I think what's interesting is a segment of new shoppers, of older generations. So they're being influenced by their family and friends so they can stay nice and snug at home. So some of those people now will continue shopping online post-COVID.
And do you think there will be like a reversion to the mean? Well, I don't know when post-COVID is, but I guess the longer it lasts, the less likely to be a reversion to the mean.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the uncertainty right now. We don't know how long it will last. Also, what it will do to our economy. So I think that's sort of another factor that definitely ties in here.
I don't know. I heard from the president the economy's great. Wall Street's up. Matt, do you work with a lot of high growth digital natives? What's your take on the move to e-commerce?
Yeah, I mean, I think up until a few months ago, when we were talking to prospective clients, our spiel was always, we work with digitally native brands, and now the message is changing a little bit because we've started working with more and more so brands that are not digitally native, that are kind of traditional or more offline, that are now moving online. So, the digitally natives are there for sure, and even more so now with different platforms that really enable commerce, like Shopify. But what's really fascinating is seeing a lot of these brands that sort of mentioned earlier, maybe were over-indexed on the offline world, sold into Dick's and GameStop and Barnes and Noble and doors that were challenged over the last few months as states were shut down. These are the brands that are now going online, and these are the brands that are like, well, gosh, like maybe now's the time to actually spin up that Shopify store, that eBay or Etsy store, that Kickstarter, to actually take advantage of the infrastructure, the technology that has come a far way in e-commerce and technology that makes selling online really darn easy. The friction now, the sort of final frontier of friction in e-commerce is that physical side. It's the side that all of us on this call, well, certainly the panelists are the ones that are really solving a lot of these challenges today.
Yeah, these folks are going to learn, I think, that putting inventory close to the customer is the only way to survive. And to do that, you need a multi-node network, which is complex. Jenny, what's the best way to manage uncertainties given all the disruption that's already happened this year?
Prepare for constant change, right? Not surprising. I think one great way to be nimble is through partnerships. And I realize how this sounds coming from me, a technology provider, but I'm thinking in the same way. So how do I deliver, convey customers more value, but I have to be quick. I can't take a year to build something to give to you. So having great partners, it gives you flexibility, it gives you access to experts and really the power to move quickly. And then I think second, what I've been thinking about is just gaining control of your data. So your inventory, your customer, your transportation, your invoice data. And this problem is really challenging because we know every supply chain has its own nuances, but really reducing the risk in your decision making, especially right now, is really important. So we're seeing a lot of our customers upgrading their core platform systems like the DOMs, the ERPs, the TMS, and the CRMs.
Rodney, do you have thoughts on that?
I think you need a multi-pronged approach here. And I know if like e-commerce, like what they've done extremely well, and I came from this environment, I came from both environments actually. But what it is like more and more e-commerce companies, they're doing well like direct to consumer, but they're also going to brick and mortar. But it's flexibility into what you can do, how you're approaching customers, and what really the future holds, I think, is more of that. And you see both these enterprise brands like Procter & Gamble going to e-commerce and acquiring customers, and then you see e-commerce when going into brick and mortar retail. So there's a multi-pronged approach here. So that's what I'm seeing.
Okay, we got a question from the group. Inventory equals flexibility. What are we seeing in terms of warehouse utilization? Are companies increasing their inventory in stock or trying to manage cash? If they're increasing the stock, is the slow-moving obsolete goods that will need to be discounted? Are there slow-moving obsolete goods that need to be discounted? Jenny, do you have thoughts on that? I'm happy to weigh in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing as far as, I don't know if this completely answers this question, but our customers are using inventory from stores. So rather than, delivering from, their typical supply chain of delivering from their warehouse, they're trying to use the inventory they have and deliver from stores. So that's also challenging, right? Because stores aren't built for delivery, but even, a lot of these stores are closed. So they've become these blackout, warehouses. And so that's another way, they've been using their resources and being more nimble with their inventory.
Yeah, well, we saw Kroger had open what we call a dark store in Cincinnati. So we'll send our, we don't want the customers in there screwing up our inventory. Let's send our own pickers in there. And so they closed the store. And, I don't know if they're expanding that or not, but it seems like people are moving that direction.
Yeah.
Let's move to Q4 readiness. I joke that folks start on January 2nd working on Q4 and Black Friday, and this year that Black Friday came on March 12th, and everybody's caught sort of flat-footed. And now what we're seeing is we're at Black Friday volumes every day for many of the big online retailers. And so, Matt, I'll ask you, start with you. Q4 is always challenging. What are additional challenges, and how can retailers and brands brace for Q4?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Because I'm a bit of a dork, I'm always talking to my local FedEx and UPS drivers and kind of asking the guys on the ground and the gals on the ground, like, what's happening. And as you suggested, it's literally Black Friday, Cyber Monday volume every day since, mid to late March. So, it's just exceptional to think about what volumes will be, for the final 6 weeks of the month. I think it's something that brands, certainly, the digitally native brands, maybe the younger brands are not clearly appreciating just how massive Q4 will be, right? It's not going to be like Q4 last year plus, 10%. Like, it's going to be significant. And then, there's that other variable of like what COVID will look like in this country in another few months, right? Is it going to be better or worse or kind of the same? Assuming it's not going to be a whole lot better, although I wish I was a little more optimistic on the situation. Q4 is going to be massive. So, I think brands are really trying to understand what the world will look like. I had a conversation a few days ago with a brand that we support. They sell cookware and kitchenware online, pots and pans and baking sheets. So definitely kind of the right place at the right time in terms of an industry that is sort of part of that stay-at-home trade, if you will. And, they were finalizing their holiday buy and wondering, how much should they purchase? I'm certainly not a merchandiser or planner by any means, but, my general feedback to them was, given the product is manufactured overseas, take your sort of bullish case scenario and multiply that by a factor of probably, 1.5 to 2x. What you don't want to happen, and what I think will happen with a lot of brands, because, forecasting is really challenging, especially amongst younger brands and with larger brands as well. What you don't want to happen is to sell out products and, wake up December 1st and you really have missed out on those final 4 weeks of, crunch time sales where you generate a lot of your business. So I think this e-commerce season will be, extraordinary. And for brands, it's really understand that balance of like buying too much versus buying too little, and what happens if you buy too much. How do you potentially discount that early next year? But all these uncertainties is adding to an already, or I should say, is exacerbating an already challenging time of year.
Totally. We have a question from the audience about sharing data. Can the person who submitted that ask another question to sort of give us more details on how to answer that? And while you do that, Rodney, do you have thoughts on Q4 and how to prepare, how to brace?
Yeah, I think what Matt, he hit the nail on the head. Sales operations planning is the backbone is predictive in the past. So when you have really a disrupted past and you're not sure what's going to happen for the future, it's what do you do? What we're seeing, a lot of brands are taking different inventory strategies and position strategies. So they may be increasing what they're producing, making sure they have capacity and excess capacity in the factories, and then they'll position this differently around the country. That's why companies like FLEXE are so helpful to these brands. And it's a different approach than they've ever have in the past, because they truly don't know what the future is. So I would I wouldn't throw out your planning model, but it's like really think heavily into how accurate that's going to be for the future.
Yeah, I've always studiously stayed away from forecasting in my career because forecasting's hard. And
Yeah.
you know, as Matt said, you might want to like double down and order more inventory in case you run out of stock. But equally, like you don't want to wake up on January 2nd not having sold through your stuff and be out of cash. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but both sound scary.
Yeah, and working capital is a problem as well, right? Like, so if you're spending all of your money and you don't have working capital, that can, you know, sabotage your business.
Yeah, good time to be long on cash. Jenny, what are different or maybe new metrics that are being exercised to measure performance and satisfaction of consumers?
Yeah, I mean, I think measuring satisfaction of customers, I mean, I think what's hard right now is in e-commerce, it's hard to set a promise. And so it's really that setting the promise because they don't have the data to even measure the satisfaction, how it relates to, was this shipment on time? And then how did customer care handle the situation? So I think there's something around the data here. And most of our customers, we ask how delivery affects CSAT, and most of them can't tell us. And so I think it's another issue of data and having all of this stuff in one place so you can even make decisions around your supply chain and setting customer, you know, expectations.
Yeah, I think customers are sort of willing to change their expectations in this crazy time, but it's good to set the expectations. If things are going to take 5 to 9 days instead of 2 days, if you tell them up front, they will understand, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I think they're forgiving on speed if you at least give them the proper communication and expectation, for sure.
Yeah. It's funny, I was thinking back to our forecasting system at Amazon. We had what you call a causal you could put in to make sure that doesn't get reflected in seasonality, and it seems like 2020 is just one big causal. I was going to have to block out 4 to 8 months of causal and just go back to 2019, I guess. Question from audience to everybody. Did retailers just skip a season? Are they skipping the summer and moving straight to fall and winter? Have you seen any of that? Matt, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is where, you know, I'm somewhat handicapped by not being a merchandiser or a planner necessarily, but, you know, I think it really depends on, you know, if the product is, you know, has some element of seasonality, you know, if it is a perishable, you know, whether it's truly, you know, in the sort of food and beverage space, a true perishable, or fashion, which also has, you know, some level of perishability there. You know, going back to that brand that I mentioned earlier that sells, you know, kitchenware and cookware, there's really not a whole lot of perishability there. Now, of course, you want to introduce new SKUs, new colors, new designs. So, you know, there might be some level of perishability there, but, you know, I think generally brands are, you know, the e-com brands that I'm working with mostly have, you know, quickly sold out a product that they bought through for Q2 and Q3. You know, they were left with, you know, wait lists and sort of back orders for a lot of the products. So I don't think it's so much a case of skipping over the season. I think it's the season happening in far less than the, you know, traditional 3 months that's typically reserved for seasons.
You mentioned apparel. I've heard statistics that companies are selling lots more shirts, but not very many pants these days because we all see each other from the chest up. Rodney or Jenny, do you have thoughts on skipping a season?
I guess I can comment. I wouldn't hear that we're skipping a season. It's just that I mean, some of our customers, you know, home improvement retailers, their season is always summer. And so now it's just, if you think now how many home improvement projects are happening, and plus everyone wants to use their patios because they can't go anywhere. So it's sort of like the season, every season is just sort of on steroids is sort of what it feels like. That's sort of more of what we're seeing.
Great. Rodney, you want to pass or go?
Yeah, I'd pass. I would echo, you know, what Jenny and Matt said there.
Okay. Well, creating flexibility through supply chain, we like flexibility because it's in our name. But Rodney, what does flexibility mean in terms of supply chain?
Yeah, I think there's a few aspects of this. And just simply put, you can do what flexibility means, you can do what your business needs you to do, right? So you can react to every aspect of your supply chain, both good and bad. And what I asked myself, when I was at Apple, when I was at Harry's, or even today, with many of our customers, it's number one, can I ramp up and down across all aspects of my supply chain? This is just not with suppliers, but it's, with downstream partners like warehousing, pick and pack, et cetera, right? Your business is constantly changing. Are you stuck where you only can do one of those or the other? So that's the first thing. The second is, do I have the supply chain that is aligned to where I'm going with the business? If you're a 2 to 3x month over month growth company versus someone who's establishing, a sustaining brand, do you have that, what you need to be successful in those different areas? And then lastly, do you have the performance needed to support me? So there's different early stage company, there's difference of suppliers, there's different partners, and it's like, do I have those things I need? And both of these need different things to help you support your business. But like those three things high level I look at, and they're relatively easy, whether or not you're a small, medium, or enterprise customer. You can constantly think about those, but those are what flexibility should be in your supply chain.
Yeah, these times when you have sort of exogenous forces forcing either an up or a down, it's scary to make decisions, especially if you're having to sign a 5-year contract with a warehouse provider, because next year may be back to the old normal, or maybe the new normal, who knows? Jenny, in terms of last mile, how do you see flexibility coming into play?
2 areas I'm thinking about. So flexibility and fulfillment, obviously. So we talk a lot about localizing inventory, using stores, using flexible warehousing to help with speed when it matters. So I think in consumables, that's where speed definitely matters. You want something right away. Also, I would say in your carrier network. So if you only have one carrier and that carrier is experiencing massive delays, which many of them are right now, or they're slapping on peak surcharges in the middle of summer, can you kind of bend and weave and use multiple resources when, and optimize when it matters? So I think that's what many of our retailers are struggling with right now.
Yeah, we had a customer who has a contract with one of the big 3 carriers, and the carrier wouldn't even come pick up because they were too busy, and so we had packages sitting on the dock waiting for the truck to arrive, and it didn't come till the next day. Super scary.
We also had a customer, this was pre-COVID, but Canada Post went on strike. It was the only carrier they used. So you can imagine somebody was in deep trouble over there. So it's just sort of, you never know when something's gonna happen. And so you always have to be prepared and be flexible.
Yeah, we were talking to a digital native brand who's now they have stores, but they've shut them down, and so their only revenue source is e-commerce, and they're shipping out of a single warehouse in Ohio. And they're like, if they have a COVID case, we're not shipping any product for 2 or 3 days minimum while everybody gets tested and they sanitize the place. And so that's like a zero revenue situation that they're trying to figure out alternatives to.
It's happening with suppliers too, actually. So if your suppliers, your drop shippers are shutting down, that also leaves you sort of stranded. So keep an eye on.
In terms of being flexible, another question about inventory. How are brands approaching their inventory strategy for 2021 versus spring 2020? This person has jumped all the way to next year. Do you have thoughts, Rodney?
The flexibility portion, that I was just mentioning around the inventory positions and planning, there's a few things, and I'm going to take Mike Corvo. We just talked about this with him. He's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Colgate. It's developing this directly in your supply chain, knowing every single aspect. Do you know where your raw materials are coming from? Do you know what's happening within your factories? Do you know all those freight forwarders? Do you know who you're working with warehousing? And it's like the people, the capacity, it's every single aspect, but then also putting contingency planning around this. And Mike did a great job with Colgate, and you can see what they did clearly international supply chain. What happened, China started going down in December, which I'm sure impacted a lot of people on this call. He immediately and his team immediately moved everything to North America. And then what happened, obviously North America later still, went down. They moved everything back to China quickly, and then China started producing the rest of the world. So it was something where you're building that flexibility in, but it's all through dynamic of knowing what you're doing and knowing your entire supply chain.
Okay, another question from the audience. Q4 represents a demand planning challenge. It looks like lots of interest in the inventory. Q4 represents a forecasting challenge, which leads to an inventory challenge. However, logistics will likely be the limiting resources. How are the key players in the last mile preparing? There's, I guess, four key players in the last mile. If you count Amazon, you got Amazon, FedEx, UPS, Postal Service. You guys may have others in particular, Jenny. And I think they're out there hiring as fast as they can and bringing trucks online and scrambling for those resources, both human and assets, physical assets. So I think they're going as fast as they can, but they're still, as we were saying, they're running behind. Jenny, have other thoughts on other players?
Well, I mean, I definitely agree on just human capacity. So trying to hire, we just see them struggling, even with, integrations and things like that. Just for technology, we see a huge backlog. But I think actually a lot of these carriers are trying to up their game on experience. I see them actually doing some interesting things to compete here. So you're seeing UPS trying to compete with Amazon with points on a map and showing how many stops away they are. But they're going to have a hard time, I think, innovating now during the time of COVID. Yeah.
It's a fascinating time because you see some companies who are like, man, this is day one. We can innovate and we don't have any bureaucracy. We can just go do stuff. And those companies are thriving. And then others who are, probably older, more established companies still have lots of VPs and SVPs who want to weigh in on things. And they're adjusting a little slower. Other thoughts on the last mile? Sorry, for my editorial. Any other thoughts on the last mile preparing from Matt or Rodney?
Yeah. I mean, I think just quickly. I mean, I think we sort of touched on a little, or a few minutes ago, but the challenge as we're all experiencing, and certainly as the carriers are experiencing, and some 3PLs are experiencing, is that this is the physical side of e-commerce, right? It's not enterprise software. It can't scale relatively infinitely, right? It's not AWS or Azure or Google Cloud where I'm speaking out of turn here, so Dave will probably shut me down, but it scales much easier than a delivery person where there's only so much capacity in a FedEx step van. And yes, as quickly as they are trying to scale up, I mean, it's incredibly challenging, in Amazon numbers to, when they announced, I think they had 2 announcements that they were, each announcement was that they were bringing on 100,000 new workers. I mean, 100,000 of anything is a lot, all right? I mean, can you imagine hiring and onboarding and having them, upheld to your standards? It's really, really challenging. So I think from a brand's perspective, you can sort of throw all your eggs in that basket and say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to hope and pray that UPS and FedEx and the carriers and my partners do their job, or what can you do to help sort of compensate for the inevitable challenge that will happen? So do you start running promos, marketing emails or discounting or whatever you're planning on doing in a sort of typical year around Black Friday? Do you sort of create your own sort of Amazon Prime Day, for your brand to sort of push that up a couple of weeks to help sort of the carriers balance their inevitable supply crunch?
Yeah, I'm not going to shut you down. We always say moving protons and neutrons is harder than moving electrons. And this is a perfect case where the physical world is much harder to scale than the electronic world, the digital world. One question, I'm going completely off script. One question I had is, we have all this labor on the street. We're up to 15%, 18% unemployment, and now it's still about 10%. Is it possible to transform people who are out of work as waiters and waitresses to either warehouse workers or delivery drivers, or like, is there going to be an a fit between people who need work and work in the supply chain where it's needed, workers in the supply chain where it's needed? Anyone? Matt, you're leaning forward.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I certainly have a lot of thoughts on that. It's a challenging conversation, and not one that I can totally empathize with, because I'm fortunate in many ways that I'm not unemployed, so it's hard to kind of truly have that empathy. But if I just sort of took a stab at it, I absolutely think that a lot of individuals who over the last number of months or years have been in sort of the hospitality space, bartenders, servers, working in other hotels, travel, who earn incomes that are somewhat akin to what a delivery driver earns, or what an associate at a fulfillment center earns. I think there will be some level of transferability. Now, I don't think every single bartender who's now unemployed will want to be delivering packages for Amazon. I think some subset would, but I think there will absolutely be this sort of transfer of employment. And you sort of think about, I think it was Warren Buffett who said a number of years ago that I'm going to butcher the stat because that's what stats are for, but it was something along the lines of like 100 years ago, 20% of Americans were farmers. 20% of the workforce were farmers. Today, I think it's sub 1%, maybe it's 2%, but some number a lot less. And we haven't seen this permanent 18% unemployment for farmers who were never able to find a job, right? The tractor is what killed them, right? Because the tractor automated a lot of the jobs that humans were doing manually. But this country has a way of transforming folks to different jobs, and where new value is created, where new industries and models are created, these individuals will find places in those companies.
Rodney or Jenny, thoughts on that? Or we can move on to the next question if you don't.
Just in general, I'm very bullish on all aspects of supply chain. It's been manual fragmented for a while. So whether that's the technology side or the manual side, pick and packing or working distribution centers, I think it's an industry that's continuing to scale, and again, for every type of worker. So I think it's coming to light, especially with what happened, with COVID, how important supply chain truly is. So I think it will be a place where it's going to be a growth category for workers to move into, and which is great, I think, for everyone.
I think back to 2001 when we had the airlines and 9/11, and it was a disaster at the time. But like now we have apps on our phones, and no one carries a paper ticket anymore, and it's just much better. Obviously we don't want to stand in lines in security, but for the most part, a lot of innovations came out of these changes that they needed to make, and expect this is the same for supply chain. Or I hope that something positive comes out of it for supply chain or otherwise. So we had a question about how are the last mile players preparing. I want to go back to Rodney and ask, does this differ upstream in the manufacturing sector? Are they preparing differently for high big time Q4?
I would truly push that to Jenny with what she's looking at the last mile. I would be actually interested, in that, what you would say. But the first mile is just more about flexibility. Jenny, not to push this to you, but I'm curious what you're seeing in the last mile. Just we're heavily focused in the first mile.
Dave, were you asking about manufacturing too?
Yes, actually, I was asking about the first mile. So we already answered the question on last mile. Jenny I already threw this to her. What do you see in manufacturing in China? Are they scaling up, or China or other places?
Sorry, misheard you. What we're seeing, so there's all different aspects in the first mile. So within manufacturers, they're trying to position more flexibility into their supply chain. They're doing it a few ways. So their workers, both unskilled and skilled workers, they're getting them up to speed quicker with their training development. They're increasing their capacity in the factories. And the way they're doing that, they're doing it within both their current factories, but they're looking at going into other locations. Companies that were in China predominantly are now looking at Vietnam, Thailand, and even Europe. So there's that aspect. And what's nice about that for brands, It helps with obviously any risk you would see in your supply chain, but also helps with cost over time. These suppliers are looking at other markets. China is getting more and more expensive if you manufacture there. So it's helpful throughout, but what you see is the people aspect, the manufacturing aspect is rapidly changing within really the first mile in the manufacturing landscape.
Great. We have another question from the audience. The terms buffer or suffer and just in case seem to come up in a lot of newspapers and white papers at the moment. I've never heard that, but we'll see. Do you view holding excess inventory through the supply chains as a trend to build resilience today? I'll stick with Rodney there.
That's such a hard question to answer since it's so nuanced into your particular product categories. So some I would be like, yeah, if you have a product that you're not rapidly doing new product introduction or any kind of changes, take on an excess, inventory if you have the money in the capital. We talk about working capital is king and having cash is important. Yes, I would recommend that if you feel like you're going to sell through it. If your other things like it's super, super seasonal, you could be putting your business at risk or having high write down or write off. So that's very, very nuanced. I would potentially, though, just personally take probably a stronger inventory position, not knowing what's going to happen for tomorrow. I'd rather support my customer and not miss a sell. Again, focusing on them versus worrying about cash. But it's so nuanced, it's really hard to say specifically what the best option is.
Okay. We have less than 20 minutes left. If audience has questions, happy to take those. And if not, as we wait for here we have one. What specific pieces of data are being used to create new metrics or revitalize old metrics to incorporate better risk factors or contingencies into the business plans or sales projections? So are people using data to be better at forecasting or figuring out their risks or contingencies? Matt, you want to try that? That's a hard question. I'll give that away.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was something that we sort of talked about, before we went live here, but sort of in the vein of like, what type of companies should be using, sort of modern logistics tools and, modern logistics solutions. And, I think, I kind of answer that question two ways. I think, the short answer is that like every company must embrace modern logistics solutions, right? The brands that are, on this panel and, many others, I think not sort of embracing modern technology and tooling that has become almost, well, I don't want to say ubiquitous, but certainly more commonplace today than it was last year and last year than it was a few years ago. I think not doing so and kind of shying away from that, relying on, the more rudimentary pen and paper phone call method is sort of akin to trying to run your business today on a modern desktop computer with Windows 95 running, right? Like it's just not going to cut it, right? Like the stack has changed, technology has changed, business has changed, and you must embrace today's suite of offerings. So, I think the longer response there is, generally I find that there's a pretty strong correlation between receptiveness to new and modern logistics solutions and, the age or life cycle of the brand. I think Dave or Rodney mentioned it earlier, but, some of these, older, more traditional legacy brands, there's a lot of bureaucracy. It's really hard to implement new technology and to even have the headspace to think about that versus, younger brands where, you wake up 9 a.m., you have an idea, and by 5 p.m., so to speak, the idea can be implemented. And there's so much technology out there, so many great tools that, I mean, gosh, when I was, running the operation of Birchbox a decade ago when I joined that business, I mean, I wish I had even a smidge of the logistics tooling and visibility and dashboarding across the entire e-commerce stack that operators today have.
I have a couple more audience questions and then we'll finish up with our final questions. With the utilization of e-commerce, how will the dynamics of brick and mortar shift? And this is an interesting one. How can one leverage this real estate post-COVID? So is there a real estate play here? Any of you want to respond to that?
I'm sure Matt can jump in this coming from e-commerce, but I'll take, I mean, when I was at Harry's started fundamentally, they're going to be a direct-to-consumer company, sell online, disrupt the men's grooming sector, et cetera, right? What they started to see was there's a huge opportunity to expand your reach and also go to where your customers are, and that's brick and mortar. And you see this approach where, and I've mentioned this before, where these direct-to-consumer companies are doing both. And I think there's a great play to do both. Allbirds, others are doing this and taking this strategy. I don't see brick and mortar going away. I don't. I see it continue to expand, and it's a strategy to have both channels. You want to go where your customers are and where they can pick your product and see your product to activate and engage them and to get new customers. So I'm not as bullish that retail and brick and mortar and all that's going to go away. I don't think it is. I think it's going to expand and it will be different.
I agree with Rodney on that one. The stores are really valuable, and we're seeing two things. We're seeing, like I mentioned earlier, an increase in ship from store. They're just having to figure out how to, architect that within their stores. But second, also some creativity, especially among the D2C, but those storefronts can be really expensive in some of those urban areas. So actually shrinking the store space and not holding as much inventory there, but then they're creating these special little DCs that are outside of that area and then using that for same day delivery and shipping locally.
Yes. We've also seen at least one of our customers has done exactly what you said, which is lean out their footprint, and they have 1 day of cover in the store, and then we've set up a DC outside of town to replenish into that so that you can get 8 to 12 hour replenishment, which allows you to significantly shrink the amount of cover you have in your store. Does the move to e-commerce change the customer experience more important than before? Jenny, that's right up your alley.
Right up my, yes. I mean, we're seeing it as a company. So, maybe there wasn't a ton of urgency because there's also sort of less visibility and less volatility in this area. And now we're seeing tons of delays with fulfillment and with carriers. Even the carrier data, it's just the EDDs are not accurate, we're seeing, and things like that. So people are wanting to gain control of that experience. And just, obviously they want it on brand, but they also just want to be able to communicate because they can use their own data plus what they're getting from the carriers. And so they can just alert their customers. And these brands, they have their own voice, that's how they're differentiating. So they have their own, like they want to put their own little GIF of a truck bouncing around in the email and all these cute things that, really stand out and make an experience for their brand. So we're seeing them want to take especially control over that communication and across all of their delivery methods, right? Because now I may have parcel, I may have white glove freight items. I'm also delivering same day, ship from store, curbside. So trying to make that consistent is really challenging, but important for these retailers.
Okay. What is the one supply issue that keeps you up at night right now, Rodney?
It's having product. It's such a dynamic market. It's like, do you actually have that product? And it's anywhere, throughout the supply chain, whether that's being produced, being shipped, it's warehouse, wherever it is, it's like having product. And I think it's a very complex market right now. We mentioned sales operations planning is difficult and no one truly knows what's happening, both good and bad. So that's the number one thing.
Got it. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we touched on it a little bit, but just understanding where the risk points are in your operations. There's a lot of legacy players out there, a lot of brokers in the space that sort of pride themselves in not providing a whole lot of visibility to the shipper, to the brand. And there's certainly tools nowadays that are, really trying to, take the other side of that trade. So I think, supply chains and operations are often highly fragmented. There's so many parties. and not having a good sense of where your product is made, how it gets here, just assuming that it's going to hit your DC at some date because that's what someone told you. I think there's definitely this sort of trend of really wrapping your arms around that and understanding where all the breakpoints are in your operation.
Jenny, thoughts on what's the one supply issue that keeps you up at night?
I mean, I agree with Matt on the end-to-end visibility piece. And then I would add on to just the carrier diversity, just the challenges with carriers delivering on time right now. It's a huge problem for e-commerce companies, for any company shipping right now, being able to keep promises and then having to keep up with where's my stuff inquiries.
Yep.
Big challenge for everybody.
Totally. And the best way to get rid of where's my stuff is to ship faster.
Yeah.
And so as people slow down, you'll get more calls. I think I worry about, when I think of supply, I think of warehouses, and there's billions of square feet up there, but as that industry grows by an incremental 20 to 40% or 60% year over year, that warehouse space is being snatched up. And if you're not on time to the party, you're going to end up with no place to ship from come Q4. So then we'll go to sort of long-term questions. I'll actually combine these two. Are there ongoing considerations for transforming the supply chain industry? And what do you see, 5 to 10 years from now? What does a world-class supply chain look like? Start with Rodney.
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, I think there are 3 things here to constantly think about and work on. The first is just technology is definitely eating up supply chain right now. There's no question about it. And with that, though, does your supply chain have what it takes to actually support this technology? Many countries have firewalls. Can you use these technologies in these countries? Is your product simple and really user-friendly enough for these other parties to use it? So that's the first one around technology. The second is, and we really actually think about this day to day at Anvyl, is how do you make historical incumbent technology better? Probably most of the brands, most of the retailers have ERPs. ERPs are still very, very manual, right? They're very, very siloed. And it's how do you make them better? How do you make these technologies, automated, intelligent, scenario-based, predictive, and or how do you bring in new technologies that are actually those things to save you time, save you money? And then lastly, it's connecting the entire stack. Jenny, you were just kind of mentioning this, but if you do have manual processes, fragmentation, even fragmentation in your technologies, which truly is Achilles heel, how as a supply chain practitioner do you connect all these things together? Living in email is no longer acceptable. And I remember doing this early in my career. Everything was through email. And once I left, everything was lost. You can no longer do that today. And that's why, there's great solutions, FLEXE, like Convey, like others that you can go and use and partner with that are thinking through and helping these things.
You're lucky you got to use email. We started out doing faxing orders to booksellers, and we got a fax server, which allowed us to change the faxes in, or send an email, which turned it into a fax and sent it to their fax number.
Funny enough, we have some large brands that still do that today.
Yeah. Matt, what do you see? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I won't say who, but.
Matt, what do you see 5 to 10 years ago? You get 1 minute.
Years from now or years ago?
Years from now.
Yeah. I think, what brands like Shopify have done on sort of the order platform side, there are many ways for logistics tech to do the same, for the supply chain. I think, more and more operators today sort of grew up in the smartphone age, right? Like I'm becoming one of the old geezers here as a millennial. Now it's kind of Gen Z starting to take over and being in positions, and like it or hate it, there's a certain expectation that things will work a certain way, and when I tap a button or two, things will just work, right? That's not the case in supply chain, as we can all attest to, right? But there are tools that rid you of much of the manual processes that once you had to do, you no longer need to do. So whether it's creating templates, automating that, repeatable processes and gaining access to logistics technology companies that enable visibility so you can make business decisions much quicker. All this sort of automation will become absolutely table stakes in the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. And Jenny, you get 1 minute as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we talk about, carriers are finally getting their data together and stopping the manual processes. There's so many manual processes, but carriers will, I think, or shippers will finally be able to be predictive. So we're finally seeing some companies make use of predictive, but you know, if there's a whole truck off track, what can I do to make some decisions to do, you know, even per package, how can I make decisions in advance to, you know, prevent some downstream effects? Also around, you know, data is sustainability isn't really something that we've talked about today, but companies will be forced to figure sustainability out. And so some of that is, how do I even understand what my environmental effects are, you know, as far as like my carbon footprint, and how do I layer that into my decision making? I think that, you know, the world-class leaders will have figured that out and, you know, optimize their packaging and reduce their carbon footprint. So that'll be a huge, huge topic.
Great, thank you. My thoughts are that, you know, the world has been very batchy for a long time, and the supply chains in particular, in terms of, you know, big warehouses with long-term leases and only going to one trucking company, and, you know, having containers worth of goods, and a lot of that's because the complexity of having smaller batches and sort of moving from batchy to single piece flow is too hard. And as technology comes along and allows folks to handle that, we've seen it with Airbnb versus hotels, and AWS and Azure and GCP versus renting or building your own data center or co-location facility. And so all of these trends that we've seen outside supply chain, where you can go to smaller and smaller batches, will come to supply chain, which will allow you to put inventory close to customers and track that inventory and use smart technology to make decisions where you ship from. So it's 9:57. We're pretty much at time. Hopefully got to all or at least most of your questions, and big thanks to Jenny, Matt, and Rodney for joining us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.